So the mandate of the tax ombud is twofold. Firstly, it is to review and address any complaint regarding a service, procedural, or an administrative issue in relation to a tax act that is administered by SARS. And then secondly, the mandate is to review systemic issues. And when we refer to a systemic issue, it will be where the underlying root cause of a specific complaint will negatively impact on a class of taxpayers. And that is when we, for instance, in 2017, conducted a systemic investigation into allegations that SARS was delaying to pay out taxpayers' refunds.
Okay, Mr. Francois, I see Dr. Mabila is, it's like it's something just interfered, but
not a problem.
I'm here to connect you guys, so I'll soon have Dr. Mabila back online.
Not a problem.
Thank you so very much. All right, Dr. Mabila, say. Okay, it's coming through, and we'll have him online not long. Yes, Dr. Mabila. Dr. Mabila? Dr. Mabila, say. Dr. Mabila, can you hear me? Dr. Mabila, can you hear me? All right, our wonderful listeners, just bear with us. We're just connecting with Dr. Mabila so that we can be able to go to have this conversation. And I think he's connecting. Connect with your audio. Check if you're connected with audio, Dr. Mabila. Check if you're connected with audio. I can see you, but I don't have your audio. Okay, all right. Okay, our dear listeners, I trust that you are having a great afternoon, and this conversation or this interview, I think, is very, very much important for you and I as taxpayers. So as we connect Dr. Mabila, just hang in there.
Streaming 24/7.
Bold Moves Radio.
Bold Moves Radio.
Hi, Dr. Mabila.
I can hear you now.
Oh, thank you so very much. You can continue with Mr. Francois. I think he can. Mr. Francois, can you hear Dr. Mabila now?
I can hear you, yes, thank you.
Thank you so very much.
No, yeah, Francois, sorry for that interruption.
Not a problem.
Thank you, Francois. What is the mandate of the tax ombud?
So the mandate of the tax ombud is twofold, and it would be to review and address any complaint regarding a service, procedural, or administrative issue in the application of a tax act that is administered by SARS. So when we then look at a service issue, that will typically be your issues where, for example, SARS has got a service charter, and in that service charter, they endeavor to do certain things within a certain time frame. For example, the service charter will indicate that SARS will finalize a verification within 21 days. If a VAT return or an income tax assessment is selected for verification, they will do that within 21 days. So failure to comply with that time frame will be a service issue about which the taxpayer can complain about. Secondly, it will be procedural issues. And when we look at procedural issues, that will be the issues where SARS will, for instance, not adhere to the standard operating procedures. A typical one that we deal with there will be where before issuing a third-party appointment to a taxpayer's bank account, if the tax or to the employer of a taxpayer, if the taxpayer has an outstanding liability with the taxman, SARS must firstly issue a final demand. The final demand must meet certain criteria, and there's certain timeframes for which SARS to upheld before they can go to the next process. Failure to do so, for example, will be a procedural issue, and that is something that a taxpayer can complain about. And then the last category will be when we look at administrative issues. And that will be the issues where SARS does not adhere to legislation. And a typical one that we get in that regard is, for example, where SARS must finalize an appeal if a taxpayer was not in agreement with an assessment and they followed the dispute resolution process and ultimately lodged an appeal. SARS must finalize that appeal within 90 days according to legislation. Failure to do so will then be an administrative issue about whereas a taxpayer can then complain in that regard.
Okay, thanks, Francois, for clarification. And what's the importance of procedural justice in tax affairs? In other words, fairness.
Definitely, and that is also why our office recently also published a compendium of taxpayers' rights, and that is why we also have the Tax Administration Act. We are all aware SARS has got a lot of powers, and those powers of SARS also needs to be balanced with taxpayers' rights. And that is then where the taxpayer compendium comes in that our office revealed, and then also the Tax Administration Act to say that for each and every action that a taxpayer should have either a recourse or there should be something that a taxpayer can do. When it comes to tax administration, it should not be single-handed where the taxman has got all the powers and it leaves the taxpayers in the court with nothing to do or no avenue for assistance.
Okay, thanks. Okay, SARS administers a plethora of acts. For example, the Income Act, in the Income Tax Act of 1962, Customs and Excise Act of 1964, Value Added Tax of 1991, Tax Administration Act of 2010, as well as the Employment Tax Incentive Act of 2013. What does the law say about double taxation?
So when we look at South Africa, within all of those taxes, there will not be a double tax. So for example, when we look at the Customs and Excise Act, that will specifically deal with when you import and export. When we look at the VAT, that will specifically address how we will deal with the VAT. So within those different legislations, there will not be a double taxation. Where a double taxation might possibly come in is where you as a South African citizen who then will be taxed according to South African in-tax law, you will be taxed on your worldwide income. And when you are then taxed on your worldwide income, there might be a possibility that if you earn revenue from a source outside of the Republic of South Africa, that country within which that source is will also tax you. Then we sit with a problem where South Africa will tax you because you are a South African citizen, but also because you're earning income from a foreign source, that country of origin will also tax you. And then that is where there will be a double tax agreement, where all of those countries will have agreements with South Africa to say, should there be an instance of you being a South African and earning income from a foreign source and you will be taxed on South Africa, the two countries will then have an agreement to say who will tax and at what percentages they will tax. So that is where double taxation will come in, and then we look at the double tax agreements with the different countries instead of necessarily just focusing on South African legislation.
It is said that, ignorance of the law is no excuse. And when we come to our current case study of a South African citizen who received dividends from Switzerland, in your view, did the citizen know about the double taxation agreement between South Africa and Switzerland?
Yes, so in the specific case here, to me, it appears that the the taxpayer was well aware of the double tax agreement, but the problem that the taxpayer experienced was more that it looks like SARS was not aware of the requirements for the taxpayer to claim back the extra portion of tax that the Swiss tax authorities already withheld. And for me, so it looks like the taxpayer was well aware of what needs to happen and his rights, but there was more uncertainty on the side of the taxman.
What does it tell us about our state-owned entities? When a taxpayer is aware of his rights, but SARS is not actually aware of what they are supposed to do. What does it tell us about our state-owned entities?
When it comes to issues of tax is a highly complex matter. And like I've indicated previously, we are not only dealing with the South African tax law in regard with, and there, as you've pointed out, we've got multiple legislations from the VAT Act, the Income Tax, Customs, Tax Administration, there's a lot. We also have to look at double tax agreements with different countries. And I think it's highly unlikely that a single person will be familiar with everything. And I think what that then teaches us is the process of, if you do not succeed the first time around, I think the importance is, if there is a resource, and once again, that is why we've got the Office of the Tax Ombudsman. If there is a service, procedural or administrative issue where the taxman is not able to assist you or does not clearly understand what you need, then that might be a trigger for a taxpayer to use the available resources for them to get assistance, which could possibly be the Office of the Tax Ombudsman, who will be able to look at their complaint and intervene. And then also, like was the case with the case study here, where the Tax Ombudsman was then able to clarify the desired resolution of the taxpayer with SARS and ultimately have the issue resolved.
I realize that, most of the taxpayers are ignorant of, the tax ombuds. Do you have an education and awareness wing where you educate the public in terms of your mandate?
Yes. So firstly, we have been in existence now for just over 8 years. And over the 8 years, we only currently have one office. The office is based in Pretoria, in Pretoria. We do serve nationally. So throughout the 8 years, we have been going to different provinces in outreach projects. We've also been on television to make taxpayers aware, and then obviously with various radio stations as well to inform the taxpayers of the existence of our office. And again, that's why we are extremely thankful for this opportunity to be on your radio station as well, to inform people within different areas of South Africa about the existence of our office.
Okay, thanks, Franco. Now, after the case had been closed, I know, and congratulations for that, because you have actually decided to settle that case in an appropriate manner. Did you go back to SARS and pointed out to them their flaws in terms of the case?
Yes, so what will happen is prior to lodging a complaint with our office, the taxpayer will first have to exhaust the internal complaints process within SARS. And what that ultimately means is that you will, for example, submit a query with SARS or a request to SARS. SARS typically for most requests will have a turnaround time of 21 days. I say 21 for most, not all. But let's accept that the turnaround time will be 21 days. Once that 21 days lapse and SARS still has not resolved your request or finalized your request, a taxpayer needs to follow up with SARS regarding that request. And after SARS has followed up, the taxpayer followed up with that request, and it's still not been finalized, the taxpayer must then first lodge a complaint with the SARS Complaints Office, also known as the CMO. And then the SARS Complaints Office also has a turnaround time of 21 days. Should the SARS Complaints Office fail to resolve a complaint within 21 days, or immediately reject the complaint because they do not necessarily understand the complaint, as was the case in the case study where the CMO incorrectly rejected the complaint, a taxpayer can then approach our office for assistance. Our office will then review the complaint, look into the merits of the case, determine the wrongdoing, who did what, of the two parties. And then in a case like this, where we then accept the complaint, we already make recommendations to SARS. So in the recommendations, it will already be clear to say what happened, who did what in the case, and then we make certain recommendations to SARS, which SARS then ultimately in this case study also implemented. So with our interactions, SARS will already become aware of what went wrong with the case.
Okay, thanks, Franco. Now, do you have a tax ombuds office, outside Africa, where we can actually benchmark against for best practices, where you attend, conferences based on tax issues?
Yes, so South Africa is not the first country to have a tax ombud. There's already one in the UK, America has one, Canada has one. So there's already a few countries that has a tax ombud. And you are correct to say that it is something that we are continuously benchmarking against to see what is the best practice, how those countries are doing it. And we constantly look at how things can improve. There is also congresses in that regard. And I know unfortunately, before COVID, there was one that was scheduled, but due to COVID, it could not happen. But despite of that, there is still continuous benchmarking against ombuds, different tax ombuds for best practices.
No, Franco, thank you very much. As a radio station, we are actually happy to have you, and then we're willing also to partner with you. Whenever you want to spread, the gospel in terms of, your mandate in terms of education. We are here as a radio station, and thank you very much for your time. And enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, and I hope you've got a great day as well.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Yes, that was Dr. Mabila and Mr. Francois Feljun from Tax Ombuds, and they were sharing some valuable information when we talk about issues of tax and where there are some complaints and all that. Dr. Malinga will tell you, that, hey, the taxman, when he comes to your house, he does not come mercifully, he comes mercilessly. And sometimes it's important that we take them to task when things did not go right. Thank you, Mr. Francois Feljun, and thank you, Dr. Mabila Mathebula, for such an informative interview. Thank you so very much, Doc. Good afternoon to you.
Hey, Minjani.
Yes, Doc. What a conversation. That was super.
Okay, thanks.
I really appreciate and wishing you a blessed and fruitful day further.
Okay, same to you, and thank you. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thanks.
Thanks, Doc.